Now, when the unclean spirit goes out of a man, it passes through waterless places seeking rest and does not find it. Then it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds it unoccupied, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and takes along with it 7 other spirits more wicked than itself, and they go in and live there. And the last state of that man becomes worse than the first. That is the way it will also be with this evil generation. So you see right here, John, this is so, I mean, we talk a lot about this, John, about this passage right here. It's a very important passage to understand. But you see how the point I want to stress out, just going through that, is the unclean spirit talk, just talking about the state of a person, and we see this happen all the time. It says that a person gets set free, for instance, from some particular issue that's going on, and then but they don't really commit themselves to God. And we see this in this society, especially in this, because we got the religion of man, right? Which we clean the outside of the cup, we clean things up, but we don't really get the life. Because remember, our real problem, we don't get to the root of what the real problem is. We think the problem is all the things that are happening on the outside. We don't realize that the fruit, like we just talked about, that's coming out of the tree is bad because the tree is bad. So we have to get the tree replaced. But instead, we try to change the fruit on the outside, and we try to clean it up. And we see this written in an example of how this person is get cleaned up and everything. But notice what happens when the spirit returns to the house. He finds it clean. It's all clean. Oh, it looks better than it did before. It's all cleaned up. But the key thing here is what? It's unoccupied. Nobody lives there. So instead of you clean yourself up man-made way, but if you don't get yourself, and boy, I've seen this happen so many times. You've seen people that have had different issues, especially in regard to addictions. That'd be a good example. Somebody could be addicted to whatever it is, and you could be set free to a degree. Let's say some truth comes in, you see that, you realize, hey, I got to stop, and you get set free, and you see people that actually start going on that, what people would say, that good path. They're doing better now. You see that. But then all of a sudden you see them maybe a year later, and they're worse than what they were when you first seen them. You wonder what happened. I thought they were doing okay. Well, this is what happens. If you just clean the outside and you straighten it up, but you don't fill yourself with what is really life, which Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. If you don't fill yourself with that, you're unoccupied. And so that evil spirit just comes back 7 times worse than what it was before. So it's important not just to clean the outside of the cup, like the Lord said. You gotta be new. That's why the Lord said you gotta be born again. You gotta be filled with His Spirit, so that then you are filled. You're not just cleaned up, but you're really filled from the inside out. You're filled up.
And it doesn't stop there. It's a process of continuously keeping that full, keeping your lamp full, keeping the oil full. You've got to continue to do that so it doesn't become unoccupied. And if you're in a situation where this may seem like what's happening to you, this is nothing to be terrified of. This just needs you need to run to God. You need to give it to God and say, God, I see this. Everything we say and everything the Bible says that may convict your heart, that doesn't mean you need to be terrified. Don't let the liar come in. That just means you need to go to God with it, because it does happen. I know that for a fact, personal experience. If God can free you for something, and maybe you play with it or dabble with it, it'll come back hard, and you got to recognize it, and you got to repent from it and walk away from it and get it. And it's the life we have. It's the walk that won't end till we're done, till we get our new bodies. We're going to have to keep doing it. So I don't want anybody to think that they're unhopeful if they've got worse than they were before they were freed. You just need to go back to God. He is a chain breaker, and here's the best news: He wants to do it. He's waiting on you to turn around so He can break those chains again. He'll do what He can, but we just can't play with it. We can't play with sin. We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to do it, but when you play with it, this could happen, and that's good. But Dad, I wanted to ask you a question too, and just see what your thought was about it. Obviously, what we were just talking about taken from this is very important. But at the end, He says, this is the way it will also be with this evil generation. Can we just talk about how this passage, or what you think about this passage, and what we were talking about, pertains to the generation that He's talking to and how they'll become that way?
Well, I think, again, when you reject the truth and you don't go to the root of the problem, we've talked a lot about this. If you're just dealing with whacking the weeds on the outside, it's coming back. It's coming back, even if it don't come back the same way. That's the other point I want to bring. It don't even have to be the same. If you were addicted or you had an issue with one thing, it doesn't mean that if you get cleaned up, that same one, it could be something else. Maybe you get totally free from that one thing, but the next thing you get is something different. But now you're addicted to that. Why? But it's the same root problem. If you don't fill yourself with life, because that's the thing we got to understand is that God was meant to be our life. And if we don't fill ourselves with who is our life, we're susceptible to every other thing, every lie and everything that comes about out there. And so we have to make sure that we deal with the issue by the root and get filled by the truth of God, because that's really the ultimate goal anyway. You're really supposed to be filled with the truth, and then all the other things just fall apart because now you're filled. The root is clean. And so now all the spirits are gone, but they can't come back because it's occupied. It's occupied by God now.
What would be the root? I'm thinking about this as you're talking. The root for Israel that needs to be pulled up, it's got to be unbelief, right? Isn't that
Oh,
okay?
yeah.
So God has freed them several, and this is, I'm saying Israel because that's the story that God gave us to read and to learn, okay? To learn from. But this applies to all of us. God has freed Israel so many times. He freed Israel. What did they not do eventually? They got swept clean. The demon came back, got seven more other demons. They got worse and worse and worse. But what was it, the root that they needed to clean, like my dad's talking about? It's unbelief. They continue
Mhm.
to fail to believe what God did, and God is their life,
Right.
and God is their word over and over and over again. It
Yep.
ended up with unbelief. And I think that's the same for us. We got to
Yep.
believe what my dad just said. And as I'm saying this, I understand how hard that is to understand, how hard that is to grasp. We need to believe that God is our life. And that's hard, Dad. We were talking about this the other day. It's hard in this world where the world tells you, hey, you need that, go take that pill, go do this, go do that, go do this. It's hard to say, no, God is my life. When everybody around me is doing this to fix this problem, you're saying I just go to God, I just go to God with it, and we are not by any means saying don't take medicine. We're saying know that medicine isn't the true source of your freedom. It's God.
That's right.
God
Right.
is your absolute life. And Israel is our perfect example from the whole story. They failed to believe that God was their life. What did they do? What all the rules he made? Don't gather extra manna. Don't do all this other stuff. Was all to point that I am your life. And that's what I'm taking from this evil generation is they just continue to fail to believe, and they're getting worse and worse and deeper in their unbelief, which has ultimately led to what's going to be a stumbling block for them.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, John, he's just when he says that is the way it will also be with this evil generation. I think he's just talking about that's what happens with man, apart from God. That's why in the Bible it's likened to the ocean, waves being tossed to and fro. And if you see that's the way it is, you've heard me and John speak a lot of times about there's nothing new under the sun. Well, what do we mean by that? Because obviously, some things that are taken now aren't exactly the same as the way they were, not exactly in details. But what are we saying? The essence of the trueness of it is the same, though. It may show itself in different ways. And think about this generation. There's different things that are done different ways now. We consider ourselves more civil than they did, let's say 100 years ago, maybe, or 200 years ago, or whatever. But in reality, we're not still, when your heart is still changed, it changes outwardly, but it's still the same. You're being tossed. And that's why he's saying this evil generation, if you don't receive this truth I've got, you're going to continue to be tossed. You're going to continue to be over here or over there or in between, but you're never going to come to the true knowledge of the truth. So that's he just defining the way life without God is. You're going to be tossed around until you come to the only true foundation, which is God Himself.